Hi, this is Olivia Wagner, president of InterimExecs. Thank you so much for joining us today. Typically, when companies come to us requesting interim or fractional leadership, it's because they're going through some type of big change, transition. One of those big use cases is around M&A. So on one hand, a lot of owners prepping for sale, trying to get the best valuation. And on the other hand, we work with a lot of companies that are looking to grow, enter new markets, achieve economies of scale through acquisition. So there's a lot of stats out there that many acquisitions fail, but I think as we'll explore today, an acquisition strategy can be really effective to grow. To share best practices, I'm joined by a powerhouse panel of three incredible women, Sarai Schubert, Cristina Iaboni, and Kim Marren. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So Sarai, let's kick off with you, Sarai.
All right.
You have held operations roles at companies ranging from legal services to SaaS. M&A has often been a really big part of that growth strategy. And when you and I spoke, you said that acquisitions have been successful, but it's not by luck. So can you share a little bit more about your role in the M&A process and what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I've done different types of M&As, not just from, a law firm, but at the same time trying to acquire tech, as well as acquiring companies where you want to grow specific markets or you want to, grow in a particular industry. And I think that, having a good thesis and having an idea of what your company needs or what your company is lacking, right, is super important. Otherwise, you're going into an acquisition or you're going after specific companies just to do revenue, acquisition or doing roll-ups. If you have a very strategic view of where you want to be and where you're trying to expand and what your gaps are, that makes a better view on what you're looking for, which type of companies, and what exactly that you want to do with that, right? What is the rapid growth that you're trying to achieve with that? I think at the end of the day, right, it's that type of vision, right? If you understand what that is and you really are trying to have time to value, right? It's what is that? What does that look like, and what are you going after? And once you find that should eliminate only what you're looking for based on what those things are, what your gaps are. That should really define, here's the companies that I want to go after, right? And they should really get your thesis very structured, very clear. It should start building that playbook of what you're trying to do, which we'll talk about more. But I do think that just in general, right, it's understanding where you as a company are trying to grow, what gaps you're trying to fill, and who are you going to go after.
Oh, that's great. And Kim, you're an interim CFO who's worked with over 25 clients through the years, wide range of industries. You're an auditor by trade, which kind of shapes your decision-making. What's your take on this? Where have you seen things kind of break down because maybe that planning anticipation wasn't there?
Yeah, I agree completely. Understand what it is you as an organization are attempting to accomplish. Take off the rose-colored glasses and look hard and fast at your current organization and be ruthless in defining your weaknesses and where you need to shore up your financials and your operations. When I first started in the field, not all companies were as adept at really digging into and understanding data. Take a look at what your data is telling you about your organization. Your strengths, your weaknesses, where you can capitalize, what you need to fill in, and be just as honest and clear-sighted when looking at potential M&A candidates. I have seen several organizations turn a blind eye to the actual data, to the actual results, to what the problems they think they're going to solve by merging with or acquiring another entity or business unit. The deals can get very, very exciting. The potential can be very exciting. We can lose sight of the here and now and just focus on the transaction itself. But first and foremost, be realistic about who you are and be realistic about who the other potential players are as well. Because if we're not, we're just setting ourselves up for failure.
And Chris, you view this through the people lens of a CHRO, but also having held a lot of operations roles through the years too. You've done close to 60 acquisitions at this point. What's your take? What makes for the winners?
I couldn't agree with Kim and Sarai more. Having clarity as to what your strategy is for your company is the fundamental piece of it. And being truthful, as Kim said, about who you're going after, the reasons why you're going after them, and do you have the talent in-house or can you acquire that talent to make sure that the due diligence process, the integration efforts afterwards, all of those are aligned. I've seen a number of my clients in the past who have not had the right talent in-house to do the assessment, the financial analysis, and didn't reach out to others to help them through that process. And so if you're starting off on the wrong foot, you're going to end up truly on the wrong foot. But again, the basis is, what's your strategy? What are you trying to accomplish? Because, as Kim said, the shiny, bright light can be very intoxicating for folks who are used to making deals and want to make a deal.
And you mentioned, reasons going after a specific company. So to just back up for a minute, when does growth through some type of M&A event make sense versus more of the organic route?
Well, it really depends. Again, what is your strategy? If the growth initiative is because the reasons that I've seen that work, acquisition of a new product that would take too long to develop internally. Okay. Introduction into a new geographic market where doing a greenfield operation is just going to take too long, too many resources, et cetera. Moving into an adjacent industry, something that makes sense as an add-on to what you currently do, but you don't have the talent to develop it on your own. Those are really the pieces that make sense. I've seen companies who had a lot of cash and needed to put that cash to some good use, as opposed to just having it sit there. And so the board and all of their investors were interested in having that cash work for them. And so, again, don't go do that acquisition just because you have cash. What are you really trying to accomplish? And how does the combination of what you currently have in the acquisition come up to be a bigger whole than just the sum of the parts?
Kim, do you have anything to add to that you've seen?
I agree completely with what Chris has said. And that's what I've seen. Those have been the driving reasons behind the acquisitions that my clients have undertaken. Expand your geographic market, expand your product and service offerings, shore up an area that you may not be able to attract the talent or develop the sophistication as quickly internally as you can if you do an acquisition. But absolutely agree with Chris completely. If you've got excess cash, every company can find a way to invest that capital. Be smart about how you're spending your cash, because I've not yet seen an acquisition that has not been costly. There's always some type of a surprise that happens that we didn't plan for, no matter how seasoned we are at going through the M&A and the integration process. There's always surprises, and there's always that risk that we're going to spend more than we had initially anticipated.
Mm-hmm. So, we're discussing M&A can be a really successful strategy, requires advanced planning and execution, the right team. Sarai, you've talked about the importance of having an integration playbook. So I kind of want to break this down a bit. What does that look like?
I like to say it depends, right? A playbook is not the same for every acquisition. I just put that out there. It all goes back to the thesis, right? The thesis needs to be fully defined. The strategy of why you're doing that acquisition, it really should call out what the playbook should look like. And some examples of that would be, if you're acquiring as Chris said, if you're acquiring to extend in a different market area, maybe it's a tuck-in, maybe it's a complete different, part or a new offering adjacent to what you're doing, then obviously you have to have very specific goals, right? How are you growing that? Are there really some cross-sells that you can do within your customers? How are you going to integrate that leadership team? Because you definitely need to care about the talent, right? Make sure you continue to keep that. And I think that the playbook really calls out for how do you train then, right? What is the sales enablement around this complete new market, right? That you're bringing into to a fold. The last thing you do in that scenario is bring them all in, treat them just the same, et cetera. And then you lose key people, right? And then the market just doesn't go anywhere because you yourself did not really understand the market, right? So it needs to be very, very specific to the thesis. If it's a tech play, if all you're doing is acquiring something just for tech, then obviously there's very specific things that need to happen, right? To ensure that you have product discussions, right? Tech discussions, and going even a little bit deeper, right? Having completely different tech stacks and it's a tech play, that's something you want to really understand. And then, of course, your integration should really get down into those specifics. If at the end of the day, you are coming together, companies are probably, have different offerings, but bring a better offering, right? Better value. It's a thesis to then do cross sales, right? And elevate that. And that to me would then be very, very focused on the different markets, the customers. Can we actually really cross sell? It's the same decisions, the same personas, et cetera. So, just to kind of give you an overview, at the end of the day, no company should come into it, right, with the sense of, we have a playbook. Here's the template. Here's the timeline. Here's what we're going to do. I've seen this a lot. I have my IMO team, and the first 100 days, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And it doesn't go as well because you guys are laughing. Because it's very transactional, right? It becomes very transactional as opposed to really putting a focus into why are we doing this? I like to think of the 80-20 rule, right? 80% is going to be your focus. This is where you're going to put a lot of your efforts, or the rally cry, right? From Patrick Lencioni. How are you getting people to stay focused on the reason why we're doing this is because we need to get X, Y, and Z done, right? And whatever that thesis is and the results that you're expecting should really build that playbook. First, 3 months is the most critical. And so having that playbook being really focused on that, it makes a lot of sense. I would say, some people believe that they can do an integration within 3 months, and I applaud them for that, right? I think, that's very optimistic. If it's a small company, obviously, if it's a small tuck-in, yeah, I can probably see that. But if you're in larger organizations and there's a lot to it, it takes time, right? And having a defined playbook on what is it that we really are going to focus on the first 3 months versus the things that we're going to do on the second phase. That should be really key. Otherwise, you're focused on too many things and nothing will get done. Hopefully that gives a good overview, but I'd love to hear what the others have to say.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think making really good points. There's not really a standard off-the-shelf playbook that's going to fit for every company. Chris, could you speak a little bit to this and the questions that you should be asking before, during, after? What have you seen?
So as Sarai said, there's sort of a very broad playbook that we all start off with. But again, why are you doing the acquisition? How does it fit with the rest of your operation? That will dictate what that integration looks like. And I'll give you an example. When I worked with a large contractor, specialty contractor, and we did a lot of acquisitions. Construction is a very local business. And so those acquisitions were stock purchases, and they were just held as independently operating subsidiaries. That's a fairly easy integration because that is a defined group doing a defined type of work with their current customers. They continue to operate the way they do, but they gave us a presence in a market that we currently didn't have. Okay, that's easy. As far as the people go, we integrate benefits, we integrate general policies, those types of things. That's relatively smooth. We offer services at the corporate level that become shared services. And so a very smooth way of doing it. And you can have a playbook for those types of integrations. Another part of that business, though, was a services area. And the goal was to have service companies or service entities throughout the country. And so when we did those acquisitions, they tended to be tuck-ins. They tended to be asset purchases where benefits changed, policies changed, practices, operational standards changed because our clients who were national clients required uniformity of service. So that was a much more intense integration because we were changing how people were doing work, the platforms they used, how they communicated with clients and customers, et cetera. So those, you can still have a playbook for that, and it becomes very prescriptive, but those take a little bit more time. So understanding why you're doing it, where it fits, how it fits, can dictate how you integrate. And backing up a little bit, having that clarity, again, it always comes down to what's your strategy, what's your thesis, as Sarai says, it is important because it can also tell you the impact you will have going forward with the integration, and it helps in negotiating a price as well. Because if you're going to change a lot of things and invest a whole lot more once you acquire that piece of the business, it can tell you how you need to negotiate the price on top of it. So,
and this is great. You're talking a lot about, looking back at the strategy thesis to begin with. Kim, could you speak a little bit to what are people missing? What are the questions they're maybe not asking? I think you mentioned a lot of people don't anticipate how much time, how hard integration can be.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I would love to see a 3-month integration plan where there's a start date and end date, and it's all within 90 days. I think that looks great on paper. I've not seen it in practice. I specialize in the lower middle market space. Revenues, smaller companies, revenues between 100 and 250 million. A lot of private equity. And the strategy, the reasons why we're doing what we're doing absolutely needs to lead the integration plan, but so much gets lost in the detail. It's for the clients I've worked with, the difference between success and failure has been paying attention to the people and the detail, right? Finance is oftentimes a shared function. It's a shared service. And when we're doing an acquisition, people get scared. Doesn't matter how strong the leadership team is, doesn't matter how positive the communications are, people get scared. They clam up, they leave. I try to go into these situations with clear eyes, but really value the people that are doing the work and understanding, rolling up your sleeves and really understanding what it is we're looking at here and how processes, people, systems, and tools fit together. You mentioned my audit background from so many decades ago. It really does inform the way I approach these situations. Any type of financial analysis, any type of bank reporting package, anything we attempt to do really depends on the finances, and the finances don't make any sense whatsoever if we don't understand the operations and the underlying processes that yield those numbers. So, we tend to spend a lot of time really working hand in hand with the team of the acquired or merged entity. And I'm not sure if others, Sarah or Chris, have mentioned this, but having the right people on that integration team is absolutely essential. Every single one of these transactions is a little different. So if you've had someone who's been through the process a few times with different types of industries, size organizations, cultures, they're not caught by surprise, and they can pivot and modify that playbook a little to make sure that they're asking the right questions, capturing the right details, the nuances, making the entire team comfortable so that we're all able to openly share information and ask questions without feeling threatened. Then the end result is much more successful. And obviously that approach doesn't simply apply to M&A, it applies to the way we conduct business on a daily basis.
I mean, this is a huge piece of the puzzle, right? The people. And that when you think about the nerves that can kind of come with a process like this, how do you deal with that? When do you bring employees into these discussions around an acquisition process? What are you communicating to them? Sorry, can you speak a little bit to that?
Gosh, I keep saying it depends. But it really does depend, right? The best acquisition that you can have is when you're bringing in talent, right? And so the earlier it's possible that you can talk to that leadership team and get them introduced into, this is a thesis, this is a vision, this is our North Star. If we come together and you get them excited about it, doing it much earlier, as earlier as possible, so that they can start feeling, like Kim said, right? They can start feeling part of the process. And by the time, you close your due diligence, right, and you get this started, they are the ones that are getting integrated. They know their role. They know what they need to do, right? They have ownership. And it makes things so much easier with the rest of the staff, right? Because your leadership team just becomes fully integrated into the company. That's a happy path. Where it really starts getting a little bit harder is when you're talking strategic, right? Let's say you're getting acquired by a strategic, or you bring in two companies together and there's going to be, for sure there's going to be a lot of synergies. That's when it gets a little harder, right? That's when you want to get your due diligence team to be very tight, right? And you really start building a plan on communication, right? When do you then bring in others as it gets closer? So the closer and the tighter you can make it, as for sure this is happening, obviously the better. But once you know that you're extending it to a larger group, let's just say there's still your leadership team, but it's a larger group than your due diligence team, you have to know that right after that, right, it's going to be getting out. The harder part about this is also, when there's a due diligence, people want to talk to key customers, right? Especially if there's a concentration or key, partnerships or customers. And so that's really when things start getting very loose, right? Things start getting out, and you got to make sure key number one is do not let your employees, who are the most important part of your organization or your business, to start hearing rumors around, or start hearing it from other people. That's really when an acquisition or integration really starts in the wrong foot. And so I would say keep it very tight, keep it very close to actually being happening. And then from there, after knowing how this is actually going to look like in terms of synergies, then obviously start releasing that. But I would not do that earlier in the process if it's that strategic. So two different elements, right? A integration where companies are coming together and you keep in talent and it's a nice tuck-in, absolutely integrate as earlier as possible and bring people in. But if it's a very strategic where there's going to be pretty deep cuts and synergies, I would keep that very tight and very close to the closing.
No, that's great. Chris, could you speak a little bit to that, especially through the lens of a CHRO?
Sure. So I agree with Sarai. It depends. Sarai also mentioned strategic acquisitions versus, for example, a private equity firm, et cetera. The scenarios are different, and they each come with their own pitfalls, potential landmines, et cetera. But in general, the approach, I believe, that has worked well for those that I've been involved in is communicate early and often as you're allowed to, and be very transparent. People can see right through a line, an obfuscation, right? They can see right through that. As soon as you can communicate with the general population, let them know what's happened, what's happening, what the timeframes are, what is still being decided, and when they will hear from you. Staying on top of feelings, emotions. As Kim said, people start to get defensive. They start to have ownership of things and not give information and so on, because people are afraid, and the unknown is a fear factor. And but as soon as you can talk to people, by all means. The other point I would make, and I totally echo what Sarai said, be very, very careful in your due diligence process and who you're talking with, because the old adage of if you want to keep a secret, tell no one, it stands true. With just this recent acquisition that I worked on, our technology folks started to make inquiries about all of the technology stack that the seller had and how we would untangle everything as they were coming over and how they would fit into the existing systems. And sure enough, they reached out to a partner of theirs who this company was the biggest client. And now that we were looking at purchasing them, we were looking at maybe shutting down all of that. And those folks freaked out and they went right back to the technology people on the other side who were not aware of what we were doing. So get your NDAs in order before you start talking to people. Make sure that those are really tight, because you do not want this information to get out before you're ready to communicate it in the right way.
And what should companies be thinking about too, just this merging cultures together? One company set up one way, another's something completely different. Could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so culture is the one thing that, as much as the HR world has talked about in the last however many years about all of the initiatives that you can do to merge a culture and make everybody feel good, it is a very difficult thing, because culture is inherent. It's ethereal. You can't touch it. You can't feel it. You just get this feeling you get as an employee, in that true engagement or lack of engagement with your company. It is something that needs to be dealt with deliberately. The thing that works really well is to find the unofficial leaders in each company and get their buy-in, get them on board, get them to be the champions, because they will be the ones that will make it a success. Take the good from either side and continue it and amplify it as you can, and create a whole new culture. It's really what has to happen, because any other option is one culture gobbling up the other one. And that's not what you want to ever happen. What you really want to do is create a new normal.
Sorry, you're nodding here. Could tell us a little bit of your experience.
I would say spend the time to really understand what is unique about that particular culture, right? One of the things, that I've seen is that if someone feels that, hey, it's different over here, right? In my country, we do things differently. Well, what is that? What makes that different, right? And are we really different, or are we similar? And there's some things that are different, right? I'll give you an example. One of our acquisitions was with in Netherlands. The Dutch people, they love to be very, very direct, and they want to hear that from you too, direct. And so, one of the things that I've learned is that sometimes when we answer things, we're very soft in the way that we answer. And they see that as why are you not being transparent? When you are being transparent, but the way that you deliver the information is very soft. They want to have more directness, right? And so that's the thing that they needed to feel confident about something. And it's important to know that. It's important to understand that, because once you know that and once you understand that, and you talk to them that way, they feel welcome, right? They feel secure. They feel you calm a lot of nerves. But I also, another thing that Chris just kind of mentioned, right? Find good champions and build a buddy system, right?
Yes.
The best thing that you can do is you as an executive cannot do it all. But if you know that you have people within the organization that people can start having a buddy, right? And they can ask questions and they don't have to be in the same role. They don't have to do, but if they can talk about what do you guys normally do? How do you, do this? And how do you guys normally collaborate? Just things that are just basics, right? And having someone that's constantly talking to the other, organization, that's key, right? Because you're cultivating a connection. And then switch it up and have a different buddy, right? Like have for the first 2 weeks, one person and you start really building connections, making people more connected, which is super important when you're talking about different cultures. And then also finding ways that are similar, right? Hey, yes, we're similar at that. We do the same thing. Might be different, right? Maybe we approach it differently, but it's kind of the same thing. We're trying to find the same goals. Those are things that are super important when you're bringing in different cultures.
And Kim, when you think about, sorry, Chris, you're raising your hand here. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that along those lines, it's really depending on the size of the acquisition. I think it's important to have sort of an executive champion or a couple of executive champions, people who have a good knowledge of how the operations work, who does what, where it stands. They have the gravitas to make things happen and have those folks be in constant touch with both sides. As you work through an integration, right? Remove obstacles, make introductions, as Sarai said, have those champions, have those buddies, being able to say, you know what, I know who can help you with that. Let me get you in touch with them. Just being available, being present in all of that, I think makes a very big difference. The flip side of that, though, is to also keep an eye on and keep your finger on the pulse as an executive in charge of these things as to where those stumbling blocks continue to happen. Because sometimes, and it's unfortunate, and we all try to avoid this, there are folks who will just be resistant because they're so fearful, et cetera. And you may have to take some action because if it's stalling your integration process, there is no point in trying to fix it when it's not fixable. And so sometimes you either have to remove the person from that and put them in another place and in another function or take some other actions. Be in touch enough to know when that happens and you need to make some other decisions.
Mm-hmm. Kim, what's your take?
I'm taking myself off mute. I agree with everything that's been said, especially that communication plan. I'm a proponent of open, direct, honest, consistent communication, right? People read between the lines, people figure things out. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes we're completely off base. We don't want key parties getting nervous because when we get nervous, we don't optimize our performance and we do stupid and sometimes bad things. Right. So absolutely, there's a time to share and a time not to. But when we get to the point that we need to start sharing information, over communicating the appropriate level of information is better than not communicating at all. I love the idea of having that, those executive sponsors or that team to really keep our ears open. But those people that are well connected throughout the entire organization, right? Not just at, the C-level, but throughout the organization that are approachable, that, the people who are doing the work, who are well networked throughout the organization can walk into our office and tell us the truth so that we can address a situation before it becomes a problem. These are human situations. People get nervous. We all want to be, these transactions, these changes to be successful, but change is hard for certainly everyone I know. So more communication, sometimes a little more hand-holding, encouragement, listening, goes a long, long way. I find that even the simplest bits of information and directions that I've attempted to convey, or people on teams that I've worked with that we're conveying, it's oftentimes surprising to me how that information, that direction, that process doesn't always get acted on in the way that we wanted it to the first time through. What? So follow up in a non-threatening way. M&A transactions are without doubt a heck of a lot of work, but it makes so much more sense, and we get better outcomes when we really check on the details. We check on the people. We ask questions, the same questions in many, many different ways, or the same question across many different people, and then listen to the results that are coming back. And then, taking appropriate action when those responses aren't quite what we expected according to plan.
That's great. You talk about the details. There's a lot of them. How are you tracking the progress post-close? And what do you do if milestones are ultimately being missed? Sarai, can you speak a little bit to that?
I would say if those milestones are the things that you're staying completely focused, these are the things that we need to do, then you should know that not, halfway in or later, right? So that's the one thing that you are completely focused. You should be talking about that every couple of days, every week, looking at results. So there should be no surprises, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If there are no surprises and you're staying in front of it, you should be finding ways to remove those obstacles. A lot of it is also, it comes down to, integrations, or someone not having answers and there's no decisions being made, things are getting delayed, etc. I would just, caution people not to say, here's the plan, go execute, and let's talk every couple of weeks. Because that does not work, right? You have to be integrated. You have to be in front of it. You got to be talking to different people. You got to know that thing that we said we're going to do this week is actually getting done. And not to the level where you're micromanaging people, but just making sure that there's no obstacles, right? If you have obstacles and you need to bring in a third party from external, or you need to find someone that has the right skill set, or more importantly, I think a lot of the times why things get delayed is that there's no decisions being made, right? Nobody knows who should be making that decision. Should we move forward? Should we not? And just things do not move forward because of that, right? Decisions. And so being in front of it and making sure you're moving the team along makes a huge difference. I think, the other part to that, it's keeping people focused. We said we were going to stay focused on this, right? Back to the 80-20. We're going to stay focused. We're going to get this thing done. I understand that we probably need to integrate this system and that thing and this other thing, but those are, our second priority. Otherwise, what ends up happening is everyone in the company wants to integrate. Everyone in the company wants to do things. This team over here is using Slack and this team over here is using Team. Let's go and integrate that. But then you start then having 20, 30 different priorities, and then it derails the process, right? So just continuing to stay focused on what is it that we're trying to accomplish in this next first 3 months, and make sure that everybody understands that and there's key communication to those goals. That's what's going to make something successful and on time.
And you talk about, sometimes you might have to say, hey, and it's time for an outside advisor. We need some other skill set to bring in. When does it make sense to bring in an interim executive or an outside advisor through the process? Chris, can you speak to that?
It goes back to being truthful about who you have on your team, even before you start an acquisition. Because if you don't have the right folks to ask the right questions, as Kim said, we have to know what questions to ask before we even get down the path of signing that letter, right? If you don't have a CFO on your team that can ask the deal team on the other side the right questions, you're not going to be able to execute well on the due diligence piece nor the integration piece. And that acquisition is going to cost you a whole lot more because you're not aware of all of the things you should be aware of. So you have to have the right team ahead of time. If you don't have an operations person, a good IT person, depending on the type of acquisition you're doing, that's where you need to bring those interim executive leaders on the team initially, because you're not going to be successful. As far as, how do you keep track of all of these integrations and everything, all of those activities that need to happen after the fact? I can give you an example of, again, knowing why you're buying something and how it translates to the final integration piece. So one of my clients, nonprofit organization, buying a for-profit business. And the goal was to be able to have a combined product offering that made much more sense than just what they were currently doing. Okay, gave them a level of robustness to this whole thing. When you bring them all together, now that the acquisition is done, the combined products sitting on separate platforms was not a good way to go to market. It was not easy for their customers to access. So the big piece behind the scenes is consolidation of platforms for product offerings. The other stuff is smaller and happens on a much more frequent cadence. The follow-up, the check-in, et cetera. But you've got this huge project in the background that is all about the technology stack, where things sit, how to migrate content from one platform to another, how you make changes, all of those kinds of things. That's going to take probably the next 9 months to make happen. Whereas the other pieces happen much more quickly. And so having the right people manage the overall project that way, and whether we use Monday or any other type of project management software, it's a great way to just have a daily view as to what's happening in real time, keeping the big stuff moving and keeping the smaller stuff happening much more quickly.
That's great. Kim, can you share your experience?
Yeah, when you bring someone in from outside, I would say sooner than you might think.
Sooner than you might think.
For the reasons that Chris just mentioned, we don't know what we don't know. But when we bring someone in that's an expert in their field, we immediately see the difference.
Yeah.
And once you start down that path, if you get far down the path and you're heading in the wrong direction, or you haven't asked the right questions or paid attention to the right detail, it winds up being a much more costly endeavor. So, I tell my teams everywhere I work, and others have said it to me as well, don't be afraid to ask for help, right? We learn from the best. The point about staying focused on the big picture, I absolutely agree. It can be challenging when too many people start heading in multiple directions. And I would say we have to remember to balance that we've got a game plan in place with deliverables and initiatives and a timeline. But we can't lose sight of, if information presents itself, even in very subtle ways, we have to pay attention to make sure that if we need to pivot, we pivot, and that we take those changes and that unexpected information into consideration, as opposed to just plowing forward. The comment about, when we're trying to integrate very different systems, it always, in my experience, the endeavors have been time consuming and expensive. You walk into an organization that's gone through multiple transactions and they haven't fully integrated all of the tech stacks. And now, before they realize it, before they know it, they've got an assortment of systems that are taped together. And then you're trying to explain to your board why you're asking for an additional investment. If your organization can afford to do so, really pay attention to the system integration component, because otherwise, if you're active in this field, like I just said, you wind up with many, many assorted systems that are not optimized, and it gets far more expensive the further down the road you are.
Yeah, that's really helpful. This has been a great conversation. Any parting words of advice for teams, company owners that are looking at taking the M&A route? Sorry.
Yeah, I think for someone who's investing, right, it's making sure that they really do spend a little bit more time in the thesis. That's what I would say, right? Don't rush into, we want to invest, we want to put our money to work. Yes, absolutely, you want to do that, but make sure that you have the right thesis so that you understand what you're going after, right? That right there starts everything, right? And make sure that everyone understands what is that thesis, what is that North Star. As far as integration or executives that are already in the process, the one thing that I would always say that has always helped me is to make sure that you are available, right? Don't come from the top down to talk to your teams in a big presentation meeting. Do a lot of one-on-ones. Make sure people know that they can come and they can call you when they have questions. Make sure that you reach out. Don't rely on just engagement surveys. Yes, those are great, but you need to be in the organization. The more you take care of staff, they'll take care of customers, right? The more that you provide them with enough information, communication is key. Don't allow rumors. It's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay to have unknowns. Let your team, I don't know that, but thank you for asking me. I'm going to come back to you and I'll make sure I have an answer by whatever. Just, it's okay to not have all the answers, but let your teams feel comfortable, right? And let them ask you questions. Let them feel like you are approachable. The more comfortable they are, the more secure, the more they'll make your customers feel the same way.
That's great. Chris?
I completely agree. Know why you're doing something. Be very clear as to where it all fits in your broader strategy, and have the right people on the team, and be genuine. Just be genuine.
Kim, how about you?
I would say, keep your eyes and your ears open. Pay attention to people and details. Don't bury your head in the sand. Be prepared when something unexpected comes up. As women, that's part of daily life, and you just make accommodations and you pivot and you move in a new direction. Don't hesitate to ask for help. Don't hesitate to ask questions and admit when you don't know the answer. And don't give up. When no one that I've met, at least, has been able to walk into any situation with perfect information and perfect vision of how life is going to unfold. We make mistakes. We'll make mistakes during these processes. It's important that we recognize them and adjust and move forward and keep your team and the work they do first and foremost.
Kim, Sarai, Chris, thank you for your great insights and for joining us today. Appreciate all the listeners tuning in. And to learn more about InterimExecs RED Team, you can visit interimexecs.com. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Olivia. Bye-bye.